a series that goes along with the Practicing the Way course that we're doing in Sunday school and on Wednesday nights. And so the entire premise of the course is, of course, to become an apprentice of Jesus. And so the three movements are to be with Jesus, to become like him, and then to do as he does or did. And so today we're going to hear from Romans chapter 12, the first 8 verses. I'm sure if you've been in church for more than a little bit, you probably will know this as soon as I start to read it. So listen now for the word of the Lord. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, on the basis of God's mercy, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable act of worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and not all the members have the same function. So we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually we are members of one another. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us: prophecy in proportion to faith, ministry in ministering, the teacher in teaching, the encourager in encouragement, the giver in sincerity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So one of the questions we might ask ourselves is, how did I get into the shape that I'm in? And I don't know where your mind goes first. We're sitting in church. You might be thinking about your spiritual faith. But for me, the first thing that comes up is, how did I physically get into the shape that I'm in right now? And I can just tell you, in the past year, moving households, having a kid graduate college and move into his new life, having another one get married and really begin his married life, both of us starting new jobs, and then just eating whatever came into the realm of my arm's reach, it definitely has gotten me in the shape that I am right now, which is not necessarily the shape that I would like to be in. Don't know about you, but we all have the things that come to our mind. But as we think about being formed, I had put out at 9 o'clock. I need to get this out here. I had put out at 9 o'clock, and I'd meant to bring them up here, a bunch of little things of Play-Doh, right? And I asked the various two people, what's the difference between Play-Doh and this block? What's the difference? Or some differences? One's soft, one's hard. Okay, very good. What else? You can mold one, right? I have to take a knife and cut this to make it a different shape, right? I can build all kinds of things with this, but it's never not going to be a block, right? It's always going to be a block, even if it's part of something else. Whereas with this, it can be formed and shaped. And in the scripture, we've heard it said, that God is the potter and we are the clay, that we human beings are really much more like this. We're malleable is the big word that someone used at 9 o'clock. But oftentimes, I think we find ourselves like this. We get formed and we get rigid about the things of our lives, whatever they happen to be, whether they're certain beliefs or certain ideas or certain ways that we live. We get formed into these blocks, and we really don't want to move because we're thinking that it's going to be very painful. Now, it would be, if this block had feelings, and you took a knife to it, that would be painful to change. We think oftentimes that change is like that being formed into something different or being challenged it can create fear in us. it can cause confusion for us. Whereas, for the Play-Doh, it seems like, I don't think it has feelings. I haven't asked it. But to go from being, a square, if I form it quickly into a square, into a circle, it doesn't take much time. And then it can go back and it can be formed. But if I put it into a container, what's it going to do? It takes the shape of the container. And that's where I think that we are very similar to Play-Doh in that way. From the time that we're born until the time that we die, we find ourselves in environments and containers that shape and form us. And a lot of the time in the course, the Practicing the Way course this week, we'll talk about this. A lot of the times we're not intentionally being formed. We are unintentionally, in a sense, forming ourselves. We are putting ourselves in places and spaces where we're getting all these different messages about how we're supposed to live and how we're supposed to be, and it's forming us into something. And oftentimes, I don't know that we necessarily question that. Last week, I talked a little bit about, being in the echo chamber. That's a word that's those two words have become something that is really in vogue, right? We get in these echo chambers. We only read things that agree with our point of view. We only listen to news that agrees with our point of view. We only, this sort of thing. And so then we continue to confirm with the shape that we're in. And I think it's interesting that Paul, in writing to the church at Rome, says this: I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, on the basis of God's mercy, on the basis of God's grace, on the basis of God's forgiveness, that's all tied up in that word mercy, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy, meaning set apart and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable act of worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. There's a lot going on in just those little phrases. Conform, at least in the English way that word comes together, con and form. Con means together with. That we come together with it. We are conformed to the shape of the container in which we find ourselves. But what Paul says is that we should not be, as people who follow Jesus, conformed to this age, whatever age that we're in. That we need to be, people of faith need to be the people who are seeking to be transformed. And that transform means across or beyond. The Greek word for transformation is metamorpho, which is a mouthful. But what is that? What do you hear in that? Metamorphosis. That's where we get that word. We often think of the metamorphosis of a caterpillar to a butterfly, right? And a caterpillar, we don't know how much pain it is to go from being a caterpillar to a butterfly, but we know that a caterpillar turns really into a complete gelatinous substance in that process. It changes form completely in that metamorphosis, in that transformation. Don't be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And it's not just about our thinking. That's how we often think of the mind, intellect. But it's really about our perspective, how we perceive the things that are around us as well. The call that Paul is giving to the Romans and to us is that we should be always looking to have our minds and our perspectives changed by God, so that we might discern what it is that we are called to do in this time and this place and this age. And for all of us who have more than a few years under our belts, we know how difficult it is to know what it is to do in this time and this place, whatever time and place it is, to follow the way of Jesus Christ. But we are called to that transformation at all times and in all places, to be formed by being with Jesus, by spending time in the Word alone and with other people, by spending time in prayer alone and with other people, by spending time serving other people outside of our close community, to help others who might need help, the least of these, as Jesus would say. And he goes on to say, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned." I think humility is an interesting thing. We value humility, and I love when somebody says, "I'm just so humbled to receive the Nobel Prize." Okay, well, it feels like a humble brag to me, like, I'm so humbled to have earned this award. Well, okay, did you earn it, or are you humbled by it? It's an interesting thing. I don't know that he was the first one to say it, but C.S. Lewis talked about humility this way: don't think less of yourself, but think of yourself less. Don't think less of yourself, but think of yourself less. Martin Luther talked about sin as being curved in on ourselves, meaning being so focused on just us that we sort of forget the world around us. We forget the people around us. And that is part of our brokenness and sinfulness, is that we become selfish. And we believe that this be, become, do process really is a process of becoming like Jesus, who was selfless. He gave himself away that we might have life everlasting. And it's such a challenge for us, because the world, this age, tells us that we're supposed to be all about ourselves. Look out for number one. Get your brand out there. Make sure you've got this and that and the other thing. And maybe some of us feel like we're beyond that. But at the same time, those pressures around us for our children and grandchildren are forming them into the container of this age. And so how might we, as we have influence with them, how can we be helping to form ourselves and helping to lead them in a spiritual formation that helps them to think less of themselves, not to think less of themselves, but to think of themselves less? The other part of this is, Paul goes on to say, "For as in one body we have many members, and not all the members have the same function, so we who are many are one body in Christ, and individually we are members of one another." The bottom line for this is that we belong to each other. And we belong to all of God's creation, every single human being around the world. And when one of those people are hurt, all of us hurt. There's a saying in Stoicism that says, what's good for the hive is good for the bee. But sometimes what's good for the bee is not good for the hive. It's an interesting way of thinking about being interdependent on each other. How is it that the way that I live affects other people? And how is it that I can use the gifts given to me to be able to bless other people? When I led Recovery Corps, which was a nonprofit that I helped to bring into the state of Virginia, it was an AmeriCorps program, so it was a federally funded program that helped people who had a year in recovery from substance use disorder do national service. They were serving their country by serving their fellow citizens, and these were folks who were in recovery, and we were training them to be peer recovery specialists and project coordinators to work in organizations that did recovery work in our local communities. And it was awesome because it gave them skills and training and a stipend so they could begin to step up. I don't know how many of those members were able to then step into a profession where they could be paid going forward to do this work to help other people. And I would often get invited then as the executive director to talk to mixed group of people. And by mixed, I mean people who are in recovery and what some people in recovery call earth people, meaning people who aren't necessarily in recovery from substance use disorder. And I would often start the talk in a very strange way. I would say, I wish we weren't here. I wish we didn't have to talk about this. I wish we didn't have people who were addicted to substances that were killing them or having them do things so that they could get those drugs. I wish we weren't here, but I'm glad we're here because we need each other. People in recovery need people who aren't in recovery. People who aren't in recovery need people in recovery. Bottom line, we belong to each other. And I think that message helped to resonate with people who might have seen sometimes, oh, well, that person who's an addict, they're so different from me, I can't connect with them. Well, they need you, and you need them, because it humbles you to see how you might influence them and they might influence you in order to bring our gifts together. Because through grace, we've been given gifts, and these gifts are not just for us. They are being given so that we might bless the world, but definitely bless the communities in which we find ourselves. It's probably one of the most ancient things about the covenant people. When God called Abraham, he said, I'm going to make you a great nation. But not so that you can just be a great nation and lord it over people. I'm going to make you a great nation so that you can bless all of the nations. And I think that's something that is easily forgotten. As we move on in our lives and as our lives improve, we often forget that I've been given all of this by God in order to bless other people, in order to share this with others, this gift, in places that need it. And there are always places that need our gifts. Tim Keller, in my devotional yesterday morning that I was reading, wrote this, and I thought it went right along with what I wanted to say today. God never calls us in to love and to change us without sending us out to reach and serve others. We are blessed to bless. And so when we find ourselves in the shape that we're in, and we begin to think about, how am I being formed as a person of faith? What are the influences that I'm allowing to form me and shape me? What are the containers that I'm allowing myself to be put into? When we begin to think about that together, and when we continue to encourage each other in the spiritual formation of the being with Jesus and becoming like him and doing as he did, we come to know more and more the wonderful grace of God and the gifts we've been given, and that those gifts are for blessing this community, to bless the world, to live with compassion and hope, to call people accountable to what they have agreed to do and how they have agreed to live. Because we follow the one who left his position in heaven, as we might say, on the right hand of God. He came down to live as one of us, to die as one of us, and to be raised to show us the way to be selfless, that other people might also have a new life. Let us bless others.